Zat Hashem, today in Masechet Megilla we're holding on Tedvav Mud Bet, 15b, Tedvav Mud Bet, and we are 6 lines from the top of the page, 5 lines down the page. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. The last thing we left off with, it's a Tedvav Mud Bet. You see that?
Yeah, here.
The
top.
Yeah, there. 5 lines down the page, yeah. The Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina.
Okay.
You see that?
Yeah.
Got 5 lines down. The last thing we left off with was a discussion about how Haman was not satisfied with everything that he had, despite all of his wealth. And as we'll see later, he had a tremendous family, assets, position. He wasn't happy with any of that. So the Gemara goes on now to discuss another statement by this Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina. But I believe that there's actually a lesson in the contrast of these two statements and why one is brought after the other. So the Gemara tells us, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Amar Rabbi Chanina, Atid HaKadosh Baruch Hu liyot hatara b'rosh kol tzadik v'tzadik. In the future, Hashem is going to be like a crown on the head of every righteous person. Shene'emar, like it's like the times of Mashiach, Olam Haba. Shene'emar, like it says in Yeshaya, Hayom hahu yiyah Hashem tzvakot. In those days, the Master of Legions will be, Hashem will be La'ateret Tzivi. So literally it means a crown of beauty. And the pasuk continues and says U'tzvirat Tifara. So my La'ateret Tzivi U'tzvirat Tifara. What does it mean, Ateret Tzivi, which is a crown of beauty, and Tzvirat Tifara? Tzvirat is a diadem. It's a type of like a head wear, crown of glory. So what is this referring to? So it means like this. It's a reference to how people behave in this world righteously. Hashem will be like their crown in the next world. What does it mean? La'osin tzivyono, it's those who do tzivyono. Tzvi means those who do His will. U'lemitzapin tifarto, and those who anticipate His glory. We anticipate actually the Mashiach, so Hashem's glory fills the world. So yachol hakol, you might think that everybody will merit this level of this glory of Hashem resting on top of them. Talmud Lomar, therefore it says, L'sha'ar amo. No, it's only for the rest of his nation. Now what does that mean? L'mishamesim atzmo kishirayim. So it's somebody that places himself, shirayim is like the leftovers. It means someone who's humble. Somebody who's humble will merit this kind of glory in the future. Genuinely humble. And the pasuk continues in Yeshaya and it says, L'ruach mishpat. Also, who will merit this glory is somebody that has the spirit of justice. Right? Lawyers. So no, first it refers to somebody that judges his yetzer hara, means he controls himself. And what does it mean, those who sit on justice? Somebody that adjudicates a case totally properly. So Tosafot points out over here, and really the Gemara in Sanhedrin highlights this, is that when the courts would judge a case, it was of crucial importance that they cross-analyze the witnesses to the greatest degree possible, which is actually why it was a rarity when they would put somebody to death. Because they would, if 2 witnesses would walk in, which is necessary in the Jewish courts, to establish law, to establish the reality, they would bring each one into a separate room and cross-analyze to see if their stories match up. So very often, one would trip up and one would make a mistake, and then they would throw the case out, essentially. Okay. So this was necessary to be done, din emet la'amito, to adjudicate properly to the greatest degree. Now the pasuk continues, Ligvura, for might. What is this referring to? Zeh mitgaber al yitzro, somebody that overcomes his base inclination, he will also merit this glory. And the pasuk says, Meshivei milchama, those who turn back to battle. What is that referring to? This refers to those that engage in the war of Torah. The battle of Torah means in order to come to the clear pshat, the clarity, they fight in order to clarify what's the real pshat with others. And the pasuk says, Sha'ara, at the gate. What does that mean? Elu talmidei chachamim shemashkimim u'ma'arivim bebatei knesiyot u'bebatei midrashot. This refers to the Torah scholars. They get up to open the doors, that's the gates. It means they're the first one to open the doors. They get up early to go pray and to learn, and the last ones out of the Beit Midrash, they also lock the doors. Now, the Gemara goes on now tangentially and tells us that there was a conversation between Midat Hadin. And Midat Hadin sounds like the accusatory spirit, which is you could call it a kitrug, some sort of a the Midat Hadin of Hashem himself, or Malach or something. So Amra Midat Hadin, Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Midat Hadin, the accusatory element, said in front of Hashem, Ribono Shalom, the master of the world, Manishtanu Elu Me'elu. How are these different than these? How are the Jews different than the Goyim? Means, why are you saying the Jews will merit and the Goyim won't necessarily? So Amar La, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hashem said back, Yisrael asku b'Torah, the Jews were involved in Torah, Umot ha'olam lo asku b'Torah, the Goyim were not involved in Torah. And that's a very interesting response, because the Goyim don't have a mitzvah to learn Torah. So I suppose it means that the Goyim didn't do even what they're meant to do, which is the 7 Noachide laws. Perhaps that's what it means, but it's very interesting. Lo asku b'Torah. So Amar Lei, so Hashem said back, the Midat Hadin said back to Hashem, but it's not true, because Gam Eile b'yayin shagu v'shecher ta'u. The Pasuk says there, I think it's a reference to those Pasukim in Yeshaya, also these engaged, or they stumbled in drink and they staggered in wine. Means the Jews also engaged in inappropriate behavior by drinking wine, etc. So the Pasuk says, Paku Pliliyah, they should stumble in Pliliyah, which is judgment. We're going to see, Ein Paku Ele Gehenom. Paku refers to Gehenom. Shene'emar, like we saw that Abigail said to David, V'lotia ezot lecha lefoka, this should not be a stumbling block for you. Ve'en Pliliyah ele dayanin, or Gehenom. And this Pliliyah refers to judgment. Shene'emar, like it says Mishpatim, V'natan b'flilim, they will be placed in judgment. So the point is, Hashem seems to respond to that is, it's true. If there's Rishayim, wicked Jews, and they act inappropriately, they engage in drink inappropriately, and it leads them wrong places, they will go to Gehenom. That's true. But the other ones that asku b'Torah, they were involved in Torah, those Jews will merit ultimately. Which is a tremendous lesson also. These Sfarim tell us that even if a Jew is distanced, but he engages in Torah study, or Shebo, the light of the Torah is machziro lamutav, will bring him back to the right place. And there is some koach, there's some strength of Torah study that it redirects. Even though we're not necessarily where we need to be, but it redirects, it helps us. Now let's get back to the Purim story. So Esther finally agrees on the third day of the fasting. She's going to go into Achashverosh and she's going to plead her case. Now we know it was more complicated than that, but let's see it inside now. So it says like this, Vata'amod b'chatzar Beit HaMelech HaPnimit. It says she stood in the inner sanctum of the king, the courtyard, the inner of the courtyard of the king. So Amar Rabbi Levi, Kivan she'egia lebeit hatzlamim. Apparently there was a room that was the room of the idols. They had these idols, these deities that were there, and when she reached that area, nistalka imena shechina. The Shekhinah left her because it was considered disgraceful for the Shekhinah to be with her in that place. So Amra, she said, and this is a pasuk in Tehillim Chaf Bet, which refers to the story of Esther HaMalka. She said, Keli, Keli, lama azaftani, Hashem, Hashem, why have you forsaken me? Shema atadan al shogeg kimezid v'alon ones keratzon. Maybe you're judging me, even though I'm shogeg, I'm unintentional, like as if I was intentional. Or ones, like forced, like I was ratzon, I was willing. O shema al shekarativ kelev. Or maybe you're judging me harshly because I called Achashverosh Kelev. Kelev is a dog. Where do we find this? Shene'emar, like the pasuk tells us there, it's in Tehillim Chaf Bet, which talks about Esther. Hatzila mecherev nafshi, save from the sword my soul. Miyad Kelev yechidati, from the hands of the dog, the beloved one, the unique one, which is my soul. So she referred to Achashverosh as a dog. And even though he was a wicked king, but he was still a king. So we can't refer to kings with such a negative way. We actually find HaKadosh Baruch Hu commanded Moshe that when he refers and talks to Paro, who was wicked, he still has to treat him with kavod. So Chazra v'karato Aryeh. So instead she went back and she called Achashverosh a lion. Shene'emar, like it says, Hoshi'enu mipi Aryeh, save me from the mouth of the lion. It's in the same chapter there.
Because it says Hashem put him in his position.
That's the pshat. Because Hashem is mamlich melachim, Hashem appoints kings to the position, so we have some degree of respect, even if we know they're wicked. That's the very interesting concept. So the Psukim tell us she approaches, Vayihikir ot HaMelech et Esther, when the king saw Esther, Amalka, Amar Rabbi Yochanan explains as follows, Gimel Malachei Asharet Nizdamnu La B'ota Sha'a. 3 heavenly angels accompanied Esther in this walking. B'ota Sha'a. Echad she'igbiat tzavarat. She had fasted for 3 days, so she was very weak physically. So one lifted up her neck, means one kept her erect, standing up strong. And one extended a certain grace over her, meaning that he would find favor in what she was to say. And the third, and this is a miraculous occurrence, that the reality was, if someone approached the king and he stretched out his scepter, which was like the royal stick, so then they were pardoned. They weren't going to have to worry. But if he didn't, so then you approach the king without being summoned, you're dead. So one of them extended the scepter, seemingly without Achashverosh necessarily realizing, but against his ratzon. And we're going to see it physically stretched. It wasn't just that he stretched out his arm, but that this scepter, in a abnormal way, a supernatural way, physically stretched. V'kama, how much did it stretch? Amar Rabbi Yirmiyah, shtei amot. So Rabbi Yirmiyah says, shtei amot haya. Really, it was 2 amot long. Ve'amido al shtei mesrei. And the malach stretched it 12 amot. V'amirlan, others say, al sheish esrei. The malach had it stretched 16 amot. V'amirlan, others say, al esrim v'arba 24 amot. B'matnita Tana, the Braita taught, al shishim, it stretched 60 amot. And these are obviously very large numbers, and you have to know exactly what the pshat is.
She didn't have to leave her home, actually.
That's what it was. That's what it seems to be. She was far over there. Exactly. You find a similar concept by the daughter of Paro. Yeah, when she stretched out her arm, it stretched. You also find by the teeth of the wicked. Now this is referring to a specific story I'll explain in a minute. Like it says in Tehillim, it says, smash the teeth of the wicked. So Reish Lakish says it doesn't mean smash, but that it's stretched. And Rabbi Bar Ofran's the last pshat, Amar Mishum Rabbi Lazar, Sheshama merabo v'rabo merabo matayim, that it stretched 200 amot. So that's a big chidush, and you have to know. So what's the story about the teeth of the wicked stretching? So Rashi quotes the Gemara Masechet Brachot that tells us there was a story where Og Melech HaBashan, Og was this powerful giant who came to try, when the Jews were in the Midbar, in the desert, to try to destroy them. And he picked up a mountain, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu caused ants to eat through the mountain so that it fell on Og's head, and his teeth stretched so that they embedded themselves in the mountain, so he couldn't remove the mountain off his head, and Moshe Rabbeinu miraculously was able to kill this guy. So this is the example where Hashem stretched the teeth of the wicked. That's the example there. Fine. Now let's go back to the story here. Vayomer la melech. So the king says to Esther Malka, Ma bakashatech chatzia malchut v'teyas. So the king says to Esther Malka, what is your request? Until half of the kingdom, and it shall be done. So the Gemara says it teaches you chatzia malchut v'lo kol malchut. It's only half of the kingdom, not the entire kingdom. He was giving her up to half, which is not bad, but you know. Not bad, right? A pretty good negotiator here. She comes in half the kingdom. But this is the key. Also, he was not offering, he was specifically saying, I will not give you the item that is in middle of the Malchut. What is that referring to? The Beit HaMikdash. So Rashi explains, because the Beit HaMikdash is in middle of the world. The Gemara in Kiddushin tells us. So what he was telling her was, and this is interesting because without even realizing she was a Jewess, this is off the table. We cannot discuss rebuilding the Beit HaMikdash. That's nothing to talk about. If you want to talk about anything else, we'll talk about it, but that's not for negotiation.
They always have a problem with our Beit HaMikdash.
Right. That's a Rashi. That's very interesting. That's the Zao Shalolam. Umayniu binyan Beit HaMikdash. Right, that was the building of the Beit HaMikdash. So what does she tell Achashverosh? Now again, she was coming in to attempt to plea her case, to say Haman shouldn't destroy the Jewish people, but he didn't yet know that she was Jewish. So she didn't do it in an overt way. First, she said, let's have a party with the king and Haman. And at that party, we know eventually she points out Haman. So she says, Yavo HaMelech v'Haman ela mishteh. So the Braita says like this, Mara'ata, Tanu Rabbanan, Mara'ata Esther shezimna Haman. What was her calculation here? That she invited Haman and Achashverosh to a party. Maybe she wants to invite Achashverosh and talk to him there, that's one thing. But why did she also invite Haman to the party? Now we're going to see there's many pshatim. We'll go through them. So Rabbi Lazar Omer Pachim Tamnalo. She was burying traps for him. Shene'am, like the pasuk says, Yehi shulchan lefneim lepach. Their tables shall be in front of them as traps. So what does it mean? It means you get your enemy comfortable, and that's the opportune time to strike. So similarly here, he didn't suspect anything. He thought that they were on great terms. She's inviting him, the only officer, to this party. And that was a great time then to plead her case. Rabbi Yeshua Omer, Beit Avia Lamda, she learned as a child, Shene'emar, like it says in Mishlei, Imra Avson Achai Echileo Lechem V'Gomer. It says, if your enemy is hungry, feed him bread. So Shlomo HaMelech seems to teach us this idea, a way to take down your enemy is by feeding him bread. That's an idea. Rabbi Meir Omer Kadesh Lo Yitol Eitzav V'Yimrod. Rabbi Meir said she didn't want him to rebel. She knew that Haman was doing very well. He was being very successful at this time in his life. So she was concerned that he might rebel against Achashverosh. And this doesn't seem to be an unordinary occurrence, is that there were rebellions and overthrowing the king and taking over the position. So she wanted to invite Haman so that he thinks that they're on very good terms and she doesn't rebel. He doesn't rebel against the king, undoing her plan. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda says a fourth idea, she didn't want Haman to realize that she was Jewish. So if she's inviting Haman, it doesn't look like a Jew would invite the enemy of the Jews to a party. This is a very interesting reason. She didn't want the Jews to get too comfortable. She didn't want the Jews to say, look, we have a sister in the house of the king, so we don't have to daven so much. Very interesting things. Like, we don't want necessarily Jews in such high political positions, because that could allow the rest of the Jews to start relying on them as opposed to relying on Hashem. And that could take away the focus from what it should be.
Which is Avodah Zarah.
Exactly. Unfortunately, we have that sometimes. There are times where you have a Jew in a political position. I know he'll take care of us. And he doesn't take care of us. Hashem takes care of us. Yeah. It's great if you have a support, but Rabbi Yossi is another idea. She wanted Haman to be available at any time. Meaning she wanted it to be a situation where if Haman does something off color, something a little bit inappropriate, she'll be able to immediately take advantage of that and have him prosecuted. Rabbi Shimon ben Menashe Omer, Ula yargish hamakom ya'aser lanu nes. Perhaps, she was saying, perhaps Hashem will see the degree of my lowliness is that I'm inviting the enemy of the Jews to a party to attempt to help the Jewish people, and Hashem will help us out, make a miracle. Yeshua ben Karcha Omer, Azber lo panim, kedei she'arig hu vehi. So this is a plan. She said like this, I'll show favor to Haman, so that Achashverosh thinks that Haman and I are conspiring against him. Achashverosh will think that I and Haman are creating some sort of a plot to overthrow him, and then he'll get killed and I'll get killed too. But she was willing to do that in order that Haman is killed as well. Very interesting, right? Rabbi Gamliel Omer Melech Hafach V'Chanayar. Rabbi Gamliel says another idea. Achashverosh was a very fickle king. He was constantly switching his mind. So she was saying as follows, even if I convince him at the party, if it's just me and him, to kill Haman, maybe 10 minutes later, he'll change his mind. So I need him to be there immediately so the prosecution can occur as it needs to be done immediately.
Take action right away.
Immediately, right. We still need the reasoning of Modai. The time, like Rabbi Elazar Modai explained, Kin'atu b'melech, kin'atu b'sarim. So she actually created jealousy between Haman and the king, as well as the other officers. She wanted to, to create enmity, jealousy between everybody else in the palace and Haman. She wanted to seclude him or set him aside essentially by showing him this particular favor. Rabba says that it says in Mishlei Lifnei Shever Geon. So a similar idea, which is before destruction is pride. So she wanted to give him all of this pride, all of this glory, because that's usually the path to destruction. Abai and Rava say, it says the pasuk, this is talking about when Belshazzar came back from battle. It says Bechomem, when he was heated from battle, he was hot and exhausted. Hashitet mishteyem, I will arrange their parties, Vigomer, etc. I mean, that's a way to cause their destruction. So Ashkechi Rabba Baravu Eliyahu. Rabba Baravu found Eliyahu. Amar Le, so he said to Eliyahu, Keman chazya Esther va'avdachi. Which one is the real answer? It means, which one is it? He says, in heaven, what are they saying? Which one is the real logic that Esther was following when she invited Haman to this party? Yeah. So Amar Le, so Eliyahu said, Kekulu tanai, kekulu amorai. Like all of the opinions that we said before. So she had a lot of calculations.
Backup plans.
Exactly.
I mean, she had different...
exactly.
She was shooting everywhere.
Alternative scenarios, exactly. So the pasuk says, "Vayisaper lahem Haman et kvod oshro v'rov banav." It says Haman, he glorifies himself, and it says he tells his family the honor of his wealth and his many children. The kamarov banav, how much is many children? So Rav says like this: Shloshim, he had 30 kids. Asara metu, 10 were killed. Asara nitlu, 10 were hung on the tree that the psukim list clearly. Ve'et, it says all of the names of those children that were hung. Va'asara mechazrin ala ptachim, and 10 were left destitute to beg for food by the doors. Rabbanan Amri, and the rabbis say, Otan shemachazrin ala ptachim shiv'im havya. Actually, the ones that were begging for food were a total of 70. There were 70 children begging. Tichtiv, like it says in Shmuel Aleph, this is in the context of the song of thanks of Chana. It says, Siveim balechem niskaru. Those that were satiated with bread, they were rewarded. But al tikri siveim ela shiv'im. It rather is not siveim, but shiv'im, 70 would be begging for bread. Rami bar Abba Amar, kulan matayim v'shmona havu. Rami bar Abba said there were actually 208 children born to Haman. Now I assume that means he must have had many wives, because obviously it can't be one woman or even two women to do. Shenamar, like it says, v'rov banav. It says rov banav, and the assumption we're making is rov is gematria 208. But the Gemara says it's not true. V'rov v'gematria ma'atan marbeser havu. Rov is actually gematria 214. So why are you saying 208? Amar Rav Nachman Yitzchak v'rav ktiv. It says v'rov without a vav, and that's actually 208. So that's how we know that he had 208 children. Okay, now we get to the turning point of the Megillah. The night comes. Achashverosh is not able to sleep. Oh, Yosef, perfect timing. We just spoke about this yesterday, so you can join us, please. So the night comes and Achashverosh is unable to sleep. It says in the pasuk, "Balayla hahu nadeda shnat hamelech." You want to Gemara?
I listen, but
right.
I need just to know when it's like 8.
Okay, 7:50. We have time. You have to. Pasuk says that night nadeda shnat hamelech. I need to sit there so I can see you. Perfect, thank you. So it says that night, Nadeda Shnat HaMelech, that night the king's sleep was disturbed. So the psukim say Achashverosh that night, this is the night after the first party that Esther and Achashverosh had with Haman, and he couldn't sleep. So the Gemara tells us a few ideas, few pshatim, what was disturbing his sleep, what happened that night. It doesn't refer to Achashverosh. It means as if to say Hashem's sleep was disturbed. Meaning to say is that Hashem started to put into practice, to put into action the salvation. He wasn't sleeping that night, to say, Keveyachol. As if until now he wasn't, working on their salvation, which we know already. He already had the refuah kodem l'malka, like we spoke about, but now the tides start to turn. For Rabbanan, the Rabbanan say another answer, which is nadedu el yonim, nadedu tachtonim, that the elevated ones, the ones above, were shaken up, and the ones below were as well. So Rashi explains that means that the malachim, the angels, were bothering Achashverosh all night, and they were saying, "Look at this kafoi tova, shalem tov lemi sha'asa." Look at this person who does not pay back good. Is that you see Achashverosh, they were bothering him and saying, you see that someone did you a big favor and you didn't pay them back, which is referring to how Mordechai saved his life and he didn't pay him back. Second. Yeah. That's the second pshat. Rav Amrava says another idea, which is Shnat HaMelech Achashverosh Mamash. Now it means actually Achashverosh couldn't sleep. Now why couldn't he sleep? Nafla le milta b'da'atei. Now listen to this. This probably would have been a common occurrence in the kings back in the day, certainly in Rome, certainly in Greece. There was such a paranoia because there was constant rebellions and there were constant attempts to assassinate the previous king or Caesar, overthrow. This was constantly happening. So Achashverosh started to think the following. He started to think like this. You see, she was successful. She started to put something in his mind. What is the reason that she only invited Haman to the party? What's going on with that? Dilma, perhaps, maybe they're plotting against me to kill me. She had this as part of her plan. She wanted him to become paranoid. So Hadar Amr, but then he said to himself, if that's true, Is there no one who loves me? I have no friend in the kingdom who would know about this, that would tell me about it. So you understand how far this goes now. So Hadarmar, but then he said, maybe there was somebody who did me a favor, and I never paid him back. And that's why people are not telling me when there's some sort of an attempt to assassinate, attempt to kill me. So he thought maybe that, so then he said, immediately, he said, bring out my book of recordings where people have done things for me, and perhaps there was somebody who did me a favor that I didn't reciprocate, I didn't do good back for, and that's why we're in this situation. So that's how we came to that conclusion. So the Psukim tell us, V'yunikraim, they brought out the book, and it says V'yunikraim. Now Nikraim means it was read. It doesn't say Korim, which would mean somebody read, but Nikraim implies that it was read, as the Gemara says, a miracle happened and the book read by itself. Now, why did it read by itself? Because, as we're going to see, Shimshai, who was the attendant, wasn't a big Jew lover. So he wasn't interested really in reading this, the favor of Mordechai. He didn't want to promote the goodness of Mordechai. So read by itself.
That's right.
Yeah. Vayimatzeh katuv. Now it says Vayimatzeh. It says it was found. Now it was found that Mordechai had done him a favor and he didn't reciprocate. But Vayimatzeh katuv, it was found written. Sorry, it was found written. So written means, it sounds like it was written now. So katav mi ba'ilei, it really should say it had been written before, because this had been written prior. The Gemara says, Melamed, this teaches us, turning to Tet Zayin Amud Aleph, Sheshimshai mochek veGavriel kotev, that Shimshai had erased it, and Gavriel, the Malach, wrote it. Meaning is that what Shimshai, this attendant of the king, attempted to do was to erase the favor of Mordechai. But Gavriel, the Malach, came and katuv, meaning he was writing it now so that Mordechai would receive the rewards that he needs to receive. 1 second, sorry, I just want to check something. Make sure I said that right. Sorry.
Shimshai was the assistant of the king.
Shimshai was the assistant of the king, right? Rashi tells us actually Shimshai was the previous assistant of the earlier kings as well. He was a Sonei Israel, but he was also the assistant of Koresh, who was an earlier king as well. All right, let's finish up here. Amar Rabbi Asi. Darash Rabbi Shila ish kvar tamarta uma ktav shalemata shaleschutan shel Yisrael eno nimchak. If the written information in this world below, that's for merit of the Jewish people, cannot be erased, so ktav shalemala, if there's writing above, meaning there's some sort of a positive decree for the Jews in heaven, lo kol shekain, certainly it shouldn't be erased, and that would even promote more success for the Jewish people. So, I guess let's finish up this last point here. Lo naaseh imo davar. So it says like this. It was forcibly read, this idea that Mordechai had done a favor for the king and he wasn't rewarded. So Achashverosh said, did he receive anything? So the officers responded, Lo naaseh imo davar. No, nothing had been done for Mordechai. He hadn't received good back. So Rava said, Lo mipnei sho'avin et Mordechai. Very interesting. It's not because they loved Mordechai that they told the king he hadn't received any good. Ela mipnei shesonin et Haman. It's because they hated Haman. As part of Esther's plot was to invite Haman to this party. Everyone else will get jealous of him because only he was invited of all the officers. Now they'll hate him. In addition, they hated him because we know that he was looked at as the highest ranking officer, so there's a natural enmity. And also, I believe the Gemara tells us that wherever he went, people had to bow down to him. So there was a certain degree that he caused his own downfall because he created such animosity amongst everybody else, and they hated him even more than they hated Mordechai receiving goods. So they didn't like Mordechai, but they hated Haman even more than that. It's unbelievable. All right, I guess we'll stop here. We'll pick up here tomorrow. It's you don't want to.
Everybody had to bow to him, and that's what bothered Haman basically. Mordechai did not.
Mordechai did not, right?
Yeah.
And so tomorrow we'll discuss when Haman shows up and he suggests, and then he has to carry Mordechai through the city. Tzat Hashem, we'll pick up with Tet Zayin and with Aleph tomorrow. Everyone have a wonderful day.